This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite folklore, and share original spooky stories. I'm Jeff C. Carter, and this week I'm talking with Rebecca Rowland about her new novel, EMINENCE FRONT. Characterized by Rue Morgue magazine as the dark fiction talent who deftly weds hardcore horror and true, affecting pathos, Rebecca Rowland is a Bram Stoker Award-nominated editor of 7 anthologies and a horror cocktail book, and a Shirley Jackson Award-nominated author of 3 short fiction collections, 3 novels, and too many short stories. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Icebreaker question. What cocktail would you make for EMINENCE FRONT?
Oh, God. Oh, you're killing me on this. As someone that's actually doing like a dry January week, I'm doing this week, which I feel like, it's baby steps. I would say it would have to be something. All right, we're not going to do peppermint schnapps. That's disgusting. And we're not in high school. And so let me think. Gosh, something warm, like a toddy maybe. That's going to kind of make you feel sleepy and safe and then sneak up on you later. I think I'm going to go with that. I'm going to go with
the creeping dread of cocktails. I like that.
Yes.
Will you give us a back of the book summary?
Yes. And I brought my copy just for this. Okay. So when John Stevenson peers out of his window on a Tuesday morning, he sees nothing but clear gray skies hovering above the houses on his staid suburban street. But the next 48 hours will prove to be a waking nightmare from which John and his neighbors cannot escape. As the first flakes fall, the whispering begins. As the storm grows in ferocity, each of the residents hear the storm calling. What it says, however, few may survive to repeat.
EMINENCE FRONT.
Yes. And I'm doing my best to not hear a song in my head every time I hear.
Which is kind of beautiful considering the slow and quiet, whispery insinuation of the novel having like an automatic unconscious association that you can't fight is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I wrote this novel. It'll be coming up now on 2 years. I wrote it in January 2 years ago, and it was not called EMINENCE FRONT originally. I did have a character who's still in there, who's a huge fan of The Who, and I had no idea what I wanted to call it at all. And I just happened to stumble upon, it's not even my favorite Who song, to be honest. But I happened to stumble upon it, sort of revisiting their catalog for the character Steve's obsession with The Who. And I started listening, and the lyrics, and it fit exactly what I wanted to do with the novel. So yeah, here's hoping Pete Townsend doesn't ever catch wind of this and get angry. I hope he's not offended if he ever were to find out that I used this.
I know he's a listener, so I'm sure he'll get your message.
Is he? Of course.
Did your experience as an editor of short story anthologies influence the way you structured the vignettes, the separate and slowly overlapping stories in the town?
Yes. I'm glad you asked that. That's a really great question. Yes. So as far as when I've edited anthologies, I am very, very choosy about where each story goes, what story follows another, which stories are up against one another, what's at the beginning, what's at the end. And these vignettes, a lot of them I wrote before the main narrative, because when I wrote the book, I'm a rabid researcher when I write anything. And I mean, even from the shortest short story to the longest novel, I tend to sit down and I will read absolutely everything I can about the topic. And so even though I'd made notes on what I wanted to do with this book, I knew I had to research the science of snow, because I just don't know anything about it. And I wanted to know about all of the creepy things that happen during blizzards in the United States over history. And so I spent probably about 2 months just reading everything I could about snow, about blizzards, about all of these historical events. And so a lot of the vignettes that are in the book are based on real blizzards that struck the United States. Sometimes I've moved them slightly. Sometimes I've changed. I've always changed exactly what happened. But so, for instance, the opening snowstorm is a real snowstorm that hit, I want to say Colorado, but it may have been Wyoming, and then I moved it to Colorado. I moved the date. I think I moved it by about 20 years. But the central issue was just because of the time frame. It was the very beginning of the 20th century. The big issue was the massive loss of livestock. And reading the article, I thought, gosh, you can think of it as, oh, this is terrible, for the economy. But me as a horror writer, I'm looking at it and thinking, what's driving those cows to move the way that they're like to go into certain death? And so, yes, the vignettes are organized not quite chronologically, but I knew what I wanted to start with. I knew I wanted to start with that Colorado story. And I knew exactly which one I wanted to end with, which was the New York City story, which is the one I read the most about. And as far as how they panned out in the middle, it was a little bit of kind of moving things, a lot of shuffling, sort of as I was reading.
So these interstitials with autopsy reports and historical records, I loved it because it slowly ratcheted up the menace and it painted in the edges of the world. Was that a result of your research? Like you were just doing your due diligence and you're like, oh, this is great. This could be a chapter or a chapter break. Or when you conceived of the novel where you're like, I want to have autopsy reports and historical records throughout.
The latter, and for two reasons. I think my two biggest influences, I think, on the structure of the novel are Stephen King's Carrie, which, is sort of, has an interview here, has like a news report here, has just a piece of vandalism here. But more than that was Tim O'Brien's In the Lake of the Woods, which I find to be one of the coolest mystery novels ever written. So it's a story of a politician who loses a major election and then kind of escapes to his cabin in the woods with his wife. He's trying to escape sort of the media coverage and decompress, and the wife disappears during the weekend. And the mystery is, did the politician kill her, or did she wander off on her own? And the way the novel is structured is it's narrative and then a piece of, I like to call it mixed media, because it's like an interview, a piece of news footage from the Vietnam War, because the politician is a veteran, a piece, an interview with like a teacher from the politician's childhood, some sort of crime report, right, where the police are investigating. And spoiler alert, O'Brien never tells you the answer. You have to go back to these pieces and see if you can take them and put them together and figure out what did happen to her. And I find the novel to be so genius. It's just so interesting to me as someone that's primarily a short fiction reader. And it's not because I have a short attention span. It's nothing to do with like, oh, I just don't like, committing to something for a long period of time. It's more that I truly enjoy the structure of short fiction. And I think seeing things that are in a quilt-like pattern within a novel really appeals to me. I think it's just really interesting and neat and different. And so going into this novel, I definitely knew I wanted to do that. What I wanted to do as far as pieces was sort of like fleshed out as I went, but I knew I did want it to make it like a quilt.
Yeah, I love all those little like found footagey type artifacts and things. I think someone in your blurbs name-checked Salem's Lot. I reread Salem's Lot this year. Was there any influence? Was Salem's Lot a touch point for this? Because you render this small town in a very efficient but intimate way.
Well, first of all, I'm flattered that someone did, and I do remember what blurb you're talking. I was very flattered to see that. And one of the bigger, it's funny because one of the bigger criticisms of the book is that there are too many characters.
What?
There's too many characters. But it's difficult. It is difficult to juggle multiple characters. I did do a sketch of the street and kind of where they were living, and then doing sort of like my own little FBI investigation wall where I'm drawing lines between them. And because I wanted them to all be connected in some way, but not like incestual, like that, not where they're like, oh, we're all going to huddle together in one house for the storm and wait it out, but know each other well enough but not too well, so that if the neighbor comes upon you and perhaps isn't really the neighbor, that it wouldn't be apparent right away or apparent at all. So as far as, did I structure it like Salem's Lot? No, but wow, what a wonderful, lovely, lovely compliment to get, because I do it. Salem's Lot is probably one of my favorite King novels.
Salem's Lot is such a sweeping novel with such a huge cast of characters, whereas I think your book is incredibly efficient and muscular. You do so much with so few characters that you are able to hop around but still drill down on each of their lives. So let's talk about the setting. Is this New England town based on a real place?
Yeah, it's my street. It's literally the street that I live on. And I'll just say that freely because I visit my post office, the main branch of my post office, quite frequently because, if I'm sending out, especially back when I was an editor, and sending out like copies of anthologies and sending this out and that out, or exchange books with friends that live on the other side of the country. But the people at the post office know who I am, and they'll say, okay, what are you working on now? What are you working on now? And when Eminence Front when the arcs were ready and I knew there was a release date, I said, oh, I actually have this book coming out next January. It takes place right here. And I could point to the liquor store and the dive bar that are in the book, because the post office is right down the street from there. To me, I mean, I know that when I read, especially a local author like Dennis Lehane is relatively close to me, or Peter Swanson. They're both like the mystery thriller writers that are relatively nearby. They will incorporate a lot of real locations. They will rename them, but they will incorporate a lot of real locations. And I just geek out on that. I think it's so cool to be able to say like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're describing. And so I don't feel weird doing that. I will say this, these are not my neighbors. My neighbors are lovely people. No one is doing the sort of sordid things that a lot of them are doing in the book. But as far as even the houses and how they're sort of set up, is loosely based on what my street looks like. So it was easy for me because I'm the type of writer which I rarely know what my characters look like. In my mind, they're kind of these weird shadows. I might see hair, so I'll know someone has like, oh, that person has long hair, or that person walks with a bit of a limp or whatever. I might know that about them, but I never see them. I never see their faces, but I always see places. I would say 99% of the places where all of my short fiction and my fiction have been set are houses or apartments or hotel rooms or work locations where I have spent time. And I think it's because for me, setting, I really need to be there in the setting. Whereas the people, I can walk around in them without knowing what they look like. I don't know if that sounds a little strange, but that's me. So yes, long story short, yes, it's based right here in Western Massachusetts.
Is there anything unique about New England horror for you? Why New England?
I do think that New England harbors this sense that is, and it's part of it is the weather. Part of it is the sort of stoicism of the New Englander that I think King does really well. Christopher Golden does really well. You see it in Joe Hill. You see it in um, Paul Tremblay to an extent. I mean, you see it in these New England writers already because they're born and raised here. And I know for me, I am old. I was alive during the blizzard of 78, which was this massive, massive blizzard that really blanketed all of the Northeast. And I know, Jeff, having been to New England, lived in New England briefly, that when the snow hits, when it is ferocious, it is a complete nightmare. It can be to the point where I know that some people find it truly terrifying because, I mean, feet, foot after foot after foot can drop outside. And I was very little for the blizzard of 78. But one of my most frightening memories from being a child is that blizzard hitting our street and my father going out and shoveling. And he didn't have a snow blower, or anything like that, but shoveling. My sister is 3 years younger than me. And so she was just a toddler. She was barely walking. And I still remember seeing her kind of following him as he was shoveling out our driveway, and her completely disappearing from view because it was so many feet that it was above her head. And even having that sort of sense of oh my gosh, this snow can completely swallow us alive. And I think that really stuck with me even 40 plus years later. And I've written about blizzards and ice storms as well, which are truly terrifying up here in the Northeast. They're scary. I've lived here and I've lived in New England my entire life, and I still find them terrifying. There is something about how the air changes. There's something about how sound changes, how you become both trapped, wherever you are, and can become stuck somewhere. You can become buried. It's everything about it is, for me, scary. I don't find snow to be, sort of beautiful and picturesque. And everyone I was talking to this year, we hadn't been hit with snow too significantly before the Christmas holiday. And friends of mine that live in the area, they're like, gosh, I really hope we get some snow for Christmas. I'm like, not me. I would be perfectly happy with it being a completely dry winter. I don't love the cold, but I would rather be bitter cold and completely dry than even having a dusting. But I think that's all about New England. Now, yeah, there's snow, obviously, in the Rockies. There's snow a lot of different places in America. But I think the weather coupled with that New England sensibility is what makes New England horror so haunting and so unique and so different than the type of horror you might see coming out of, say, the upper Midwest, who could absolutely write a snow horror novel with some ethos, but it would absolutely feel different.
I have a middle grade book called Cold Spell. It's based on one of the times when trick-or-treating was canceled because of a freak blizzard. The inspiration for that book did happen in Massachusetts.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it was it was actually an ice storm, at least where I was, but it was a freak ice storm the end of October. I want to say 2012, but it might be, no, I think it's 2012. And because all the foliage had not fallen from the trees, the ice grabbed onto all of these trees and pulled down power lines. And so my particular town, for whatever reason, we have our own electrical company. We're the only town in Massachusetts that does. And so our electricity did not go anywhere for whatever reason. They were right on it. But as far as the major electrical companies that sort of dominate the rest of the state, once one part was down, it was just down everywhere. And so my relatives were coming to my house. We're putting out air mattresses, and people were sleeping at my house because it was the only place that had heat. Everywhere else, people didn't have generators on hand. They do now. I have to tell you, after 2012, the sales of generators went through the roof. But yeah, and they had to cancel Halloween. It was a whole week of school was canceled just because of the destruction.
Speaking of the storm, the tempo of this book is soft, creeping, and I was curious, is that mirroring the nature of a snowstorm? If you wrote a story about a hurricane, would you have a more aggressive sense of menace?
I wish I could tell you that I were that smart, Jeff. I'm really, apparently I'm just not. No, this is just my writing style. It's very quiet. It's very plotting. It's very, it's actually very difficult for me to write high action scenes because that's not generally what I like to read. And so I write what I like to read and sort of the style and the pacing. And so even the incidences of pretty extreme body horror that do show up in this book, I think were the most difficult scenes for me to write because you do have to sort of speed it up a bit, although there are a few because it's sort of a creeping and then all of a sudden realization of, oh, too late. That was helpful to me, but the few that are more sudden, I guess, sudden acts of violence, I really it was difficult. I think that was the hardest part. You know what though? I'm going to go with yes. Yes, Jeff, that's how I wrote it.
I know you're about to set off on tour to promote this book, and you've got a ton of events and interviews lined up. So that should be your go-to.
All right. That's what I'm going to do. Yep. That's it. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Would you consider, and this is sort of a nerdy question, but do you think this is a man versus nature story, a man versus self story, cosmic horror, or all of the above?
Yeah, all of the above. Yeah, all of the above for sure. And at first I really wanted to, as far as the cosmic nature of it, I'm usually someone that does leave things up to the imagination, but I do like to have a resolution. And I just decided to embrace sort of the cosmic nature of this instead. Like this is what's there, and it's not because the people are being punished. It's just it is what it is. But yeah, as far as the central conflicts, I like characters that are broken. And I think that's because I am very, very aware of my own broken pieces. I don't have a whole lot of baggage that I'm toting around, but everyone's got something, right? And as writers, I think it is kind of like a weird, I don't know, passive therapy to be able to write about broken people when you're owning the fact that, yeah, you know what, the brokenness is a lot of what I'm carrying around. Each one of the characters on that street has some sort of personality quirk that I am fully aware I embody. I am fully aware. Am I snorting cocaine on my kitchen table? I am not doing that. I want to be very clear, especially because I have a day job. So no, I am not doing that. But there are certainly a lot of things that those characters do. And I think that half of them get those things resolved, but before the end of the book, and half of them do not. But as far as the nature, in the sense that maybe this force, it's embodying nature as a as its costume, but I think that it's something else. But it's definitely cloaking itself in the appearance of nature. So yes, I would say all three.
It's like a nesting doll because the snowstorm in and of itself is a persistent, potentially fatal threat that everyone is dealing with. And also there's this supernatural layer to it that, as you say, cloaks itself in the snowstorm, but it's not just like darting in and out of the snow. It has the attributes of a snowstorm that is going to blind you, disorient you, chip away at your resistance, grind you down, find any chink and get in and chill you to the bone. It's such a cool twofer that you get with that conceit.
One of the things I stumbled across when I was doing all the research on snow and snowstorms was an Inuit folktale about a force that hides in the snow and whistles. And when it whistles, it draws children to seek it out and then just absorbs the child, like the child just disappears. And part of that was definitely an inspiration for where I wanted to go with this entity, right? Because this idea of this whistling or a whisper, or what does it sound like? And it sounds different to each one of these residents. If you've been out in a snowstorm, there is that whistle, and sometimes there's an echo, and sometimes if you listen very carefully, you may hear something that isn't really there, but it's more of echoes and just the way sound works. It did make me sort of think, reading that folktale, where is that coming from? And is it sort of the explanation that the Inuit people sort of came up with to explain that scientific phenomenon hundreds of years ago? And then it just and it's been passed down, and now it's just a really creepy story, a really creepy story. But it's a little bit of both. It's both this sort of evil menace, but also it's tied in some way to the winter element, right? To the ice and the snow.
Can you tell us about the cover for Eminence Front?
I would love to talk about the cover. So Anthony Galatis, who also designed the cover of White Trash and Recycled Nightmares, I requested him for this cover because the White Trash one was so super cool. And so I wanted this one to be very, very different. And so the idea that I gave him was just like, it's sort of a window looking out, right? Sort of like our residents in the book looking out at the snowstorm. But I want there to be something sort of insidious about the frost that's on the pane. And so if you look very carefully at the frost that is forming on the window pane, they are actually claws. They are skeleton faces. It's just all sorts of unsettling pieces that he's woven in there that, on first glance, and he did this with White Trash as well. So White Trash, the cover of White Trash and Recycled Nightmares is a suburban house that on first glance just looks like a suburban house. But if you look more carefully, you will see in each one of the windows, there's something horrific. There's a ghoul here. There's a headless body here. There is this sticking out of the trash can. And he had the same effect, such a different book, but he created that same effect, which I love, with the cover of Eminence Front. So I just can't say enough cool things about Anthony. He rocks it every time.
It's a great cover. I read it in December, and it was really cool to curl up next to the fire and get into some wintry horror. So let's talk some Halloween-y nonsense. As a fellow New Englander, because I did grow up in Connecticut, I think I can imagine and relate to what it was like trick-or-treating for you growing up. Do you have any particularly great or awful stories about trick-or-treating?
No, but I can tell you that Halloween was my favorite holiday, hands down. And not because I was a creepy child or anything like that. I loved being able to dress up, to be someone else. I loved making my own costumes. In fact, I was really bummed out. In fact, I was still going out trick-or-treating when I was like a sophomore in high school, which I'm a little embarrassed to say. But I also remember that there was this horrific murder right before Halloween, my sophomore or junior year of high school, where they essentially canceled Halloween. They canceled trick-or-treating for my city in Western Mass. And that was a real bummer, but it really sort of speaks to the Gen X time period, because the immediate suspicion was that the murder was part of a satanic cult that might be living or operating in sort of the local wooded area, because of the way that the body was found and how this woman didn't seem to, have any enemies. And she had been abducted from her, I think she was only about 19 or 20. She had been abducted from her job working in a convenience store in a nice, sort of calm suburban town near Springfield. And yeah, that was a bummer, because I do remember, here I am at 16. I'm not really concerned about this woman because I'm, a narcissistic teenager. I am all about now trick-or-treating's been canceled. What's that about? That's not fair. That's not fair.
Are you sure it wasn't just your parents gaslighting you like, oh God, she's still trick-or-treating in sophomore year. We need to tell her something. Just make it up. I don't know. Satanic killers.
I know. It's just like, listen, Rebecca, we'll just buy you a bag of candy. Could you just do something more teenager-like? Yeah, it could be. It could have been. But I do, even looking back, and they have, by the way, solved the murder. It was on Unsolved Mysteries, if that's another Gen X kind of touchstone. But they didn't solve the murder until about 5 years ago, believe it or not. So they tied it to, well, spoiler alert, the boyfriend. My instinct, of course, is to go visit this man in prison 30 years later and be like, you ruined my Halloween. That sounds like that's a terrible, terrible story.
So, Rebecca, what projects are you working on next?
I have a book that I can't announce where it's going to be, but it'll be out in the next couple of years that I'm very excited about. It's another novel. But in the meantime, I have my third short fiction collection coming out from Lathe Press. It's coming out June 1st. I am over the moon about this collection. For one reason, I am a short story writer at heart. I know that the money and security is in novel writing, but if I had to choose, I would only write short pieces for the rest of my writing career. I love the art of it so much. And this collection happens to be, I guess, sort of piggybacking off of Eminence Front, all music inspired. So each one of the stories has been inspired by the lyric, in whole or just in part, by a popular song from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And it's titled Unsettled Score. So that's coming out in June. And I cannot wait to show people the cover. It is one of the coolest things I think I have ever seen.
Awesome. Where can our listeners find you online?
I like to tell people that my Blue Sky and Facebook accounts are like every plant I have ever owned in my entire life, which is when I brought it home, I thought, this is going to be the one that's going to live, and I'm going to take care of it, and I'm going to remember it's there, and I'm not going to come home one day and see that it's like brown and falling. It's just, I've killed every plant. They've all died under my watch. So Blue Sky and Facebook, I'm there, but I'm not really there. Instagram is the best place to find me. It's Rebecca_Rowland_books. And I try to water and feed that one on a regular basis.
And your website?
And my website is Rowland Books, ROWLAND books.com.
Rebecca, thank you for chatting with me today.
Jeff, these were some of the coolest questions I've been asked in all of my podcast visits. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening. Please subscribe and follow. We're now on YouTube. Links are in the show notes. You can find me at jeffccarter.com and hit the link to pick up my collection, We Bleed Orange and Black, 31 fun-sized tales for Halloween. Until next time, stay spooktacular.
No. Did I freeze? I'm sorry.
You froze up. The storm is getting you.